Global, like the TEA, global. So our next presenter is Louis Allen. He's the principal and vice president of the creative for Adirondack Studios. Louis?
Thank you.
You're mic'd up.
It's nice to be here, surrounded by such masters of the craft and those of you that are interested in our craft. I want to take a little breath, talk a little bit about a different sort of project, a different vantage point to a project. If I can get this to work. I'm calling this session Homeward Bound because I want to look toward home. And I want to recognize projects that do such. And I want to talk a little about the influence of these projects and how they're being used. So let's take a look at a few projects. They're unrelated, different aspects of our art form. Let's take, here we have the National Comedy Center. It's designed by JR Designers. And it is focused on interactivity, and it's a museum-type environment. Right here is the Seneca, Niagara Falls Seneca Resort and Casino. It's a resort. The difference that we see in here is it's being dressed by Native American arts. Right here, this production, Puy de Fou, in France, is a commemoration of an event in World War I. And a tribute to those who died in that war. Live actors, animated figures, show sets, walk-through attraction, theme park. Right here we have moment factories for at Lumina. This is at Parc de la Gorge in Quebec, which is a little city, 9,000 people outside of Montreal. Walk-through environment. So, oh, one more, I forgot this one. This is one that's in progress. I've been given permission to work with it. It's a project we're doing with the Legend Group, and it has to do with dragons in Shanghai Mountain in China. They all have what I'm calling local color. That is, they all are generated from assets that come from their own homes. The idea of this is by utilizing your own mythology, your own culture, your own dialects, your home-bound assets, you can create something incredible, imaginative. You can generate tourism with it. You can celebrate your culture within it. And I think the idea of these smaller projects, and they're not necessarily smaller projects, but there's no IP in these projects. They all deal with their region and sort of are the foundation for what I often hear being called cultural tourism. I think I'm going the wrong way here. Creative process. You know, I have this written here. I keep trying to look at these pieces of paper, and I have this right here. You know what? I think I'm better with my pieces of paper. I'm old school, you know. I just want to note that the idea of using local color, which is a term that I'm borrowing from literature. In literature, it's a term that refers to things that are written in a common dialect. When we're exploring our own cultures, we are speaking our own dialects, we're sharing our dialect with the public, and we're creating cultural interest in our own homes. We're not looking outside to IPs, we're not inviting strangers, we're creating our own experience. So the process that takes place when we do that is some of the groups take a look at historic regions, historic attributes. For instance, the Puy de Fou takes a look at an event that happened in World War I. Others pay tribute to celebrities from their area. The Comedy Center pays tribute to Lucille Ball, a famous American comedian, who I'm sure many of you know, who grew up in this little town of Jamestown. We'll talk more about that. And what we want to do is, with the process, is we want to interconnect the attraction to the surrounding region and telling that story of that region, creating interest in the region. And we rely on collaboration of the specialists. We rely on you, our craft, to put together these stories inside these communities to help these communities recognize their own unique identity. So let's take a look at some of them. Tribute. The Lucille Ball, or the National Comedy Center, took about 10 years in the making. It's a tribute to Lucille Ball, and it's not really a museum as much as it is an educational center and an interactive environment experience. In the small town of Jamestown, New York, the population is 30,000 people. Lucille, who grew up in that town, wanted to give back to that town and started a comedy festival. And then they also had a small museum for Lucille. But she always wanted Jamestown, New York to be the center of comedy in the world. And comedy is sort of a uniquely American art form, although it's spread American-style comedy. But it's never been heavily archived and studied as an art form. This comedy center pays tribute to Lucille and creates the dream that she had to turn the town into a comedy center. Now, that small town of 9,000 people, they're expecting about 150,000 people a year coming into that town. So by celebrating this creative tribute, they're also generating tourism and they're using art to drive the economy for tourism in that town, among with other things. So here, this is Lucille, for those who don't know her. There's the center, and we go in the center, and it's primarily media, interactive, archival. They don't call it a museum, although you can claim it's a museum experience. I think it's more an interactive experience where you, as the guest, get to, actually, you can make your own movies. You can do stand-up comedy. I should probably practice that. But let's take a look, just a little glimpse at the project.
It opened in August of 2018 and is basically one of the only museums dedicated to comedy entertainment out there. The museum is loaded with memorabilia. Remember this shirt from Seinfeld? Fantastic. Kramer, how am I going to wear this? The museum is massive and has tons of interactive exhibits. And now your content will play up there.
Sit down.
It's too fat for this chair. Hey, that's me! So I have to capture a comedian's expression with my own face, and then they'll put it down here for the world to see. I look like I'm gonna kill somebody. And then, you've made it, Holly. You're on the big screen.
I made it.
So the cool thing is that everything you do is saved to your profile, which you of course activate on the exhibits with your bracelets. And at the end, they send this stuff to your email. It's really cool.
So the Comedy Museum, by paying tribute to Lucille Ball, or the Comedy Center, excuse me, that pays tribute to Lucille Ball, brings people into the town. It celebrates the town's iconic comedian hero, and helps the town develop the town for tourism, and also provides an educational center. The next one I want to talk about is the Seneca Resort and Casino. This was built about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. The Seneca Nation is part of the Iroquois family of Indians. There's 7 tribes, Seneca being one. And they went into their reservations, they developed the casinos and the resorts on the Native American property. What the Senecas wanted to do is they wanted to make certain that even though they were bringing in this outside resort, that within the resort they would celebrate Seneca art, and that they would make use of their own artisans to decorate the casino. So we got together with them, and met with their cultural group, who put out a call to the artists in the area to submit pieces of craftsmanship. And then we took those and analyzed them and decided how we could use them architecturally to tell some of the story and celebrate some of the Seneca art. So the type of things that came up is on the upper left, you'll see there's a little brooch. That brooch was taken. Now that's a very traditional Seneca design, and everything has a reason in that brooch. But I'd be here too long to try to get into it with you. However, we took that brooch, and the decision was, how can you take that image and use it architecturally to kind of embrace the guests in Seneca culture? In the end, we turned it into a dome feature within the casino. The small on the upper left, there was a Seneca headpiece. We used that as a guide to place atop a native dancer. That's a full-size sculpture of a native dancer. And then to the right, you'll see this little tinfoil sculpture of 7 feathers. Those are the 7 Iroquois nations. And the artist who did it had this image of this mobile. So we took the mobile and developed it into a large iconic piece. And the piece on the right was a native artist that sculpted antlers. And so we took the antlers and we worked with the artist to create a 30-foot or 20-foot object from it. So here in a resort environment, we're bringing local culture into that environment to celebrate a society and a group, and also create a point of interest for Seneca arts. For heritage, Les Amoureux de Verdun is a project in France. If you know, there's a park called Puy de Fou. Les Amoureux de Verdun means love letters from Verdun. They took an event in World War I, and the event was Christmas Eve, and they did research, and in 1916, on Christmas Eve, they had a truce, and both the German troops and the French troops came out of the trenches and celebrated Christmas together. The war stopped for a moment, hope was found. They took that as their story. They did engaged artists, historians, artifact people to highly research, and they based the story. They discovered love letters between a French soldier and his loved one, and they converse back and forth, and that becomes the motivating force for the show. This is the final scene where they celebrate Christmas at the end of after you're toured through the trench. The show developed a 300-meter trench, which is full of artifacts. They use 7,500 original artifacts from World War I, from the trenches of Verdun, and use that as scenery to decorate the set. They tell the story of going through the trenches and the horror of the war inside the trenches. We'll get a little bit of it.
The new show is called Les Amoureux de Verdun. It's a mix between the live performers and the techniques that we can use. We use some videos effects, we use some animatronics, but we mix them with real character, real performers. And so it's a story of a young woman and her husband, and they are just writing some letters to each other. And we go through the trench in the war. You see that everything is moving because of the bombs, explosion, and you just hear the guns everywhere. You are really in the middle of the war. They just feel that everything is alive in this trench, and they just feel what the soldiers could feel in the trench. So the fear, the fact that everybody was running and trying to find some food, just trying to survive actually. And so they are in the middle of something very, very realistic. At the end of the show, It's a very hopeful scene because you see the two enemies sing a song together in German and in French for the Christmas night. Actually, the deal was to find a way to tell the story. If we were too spectacular, it would have been probably not respectful for the people who died in this war. The people can feel the emotion because they say, "Oh, it's not too spectacular, it's not too mesographic, it's just in the middle. It's something, just the truth," and that's enough to touch the people.
So to do this, they did 2 years of research. They collected 7,500 artifacts. There's 15 live actors, 60 animatronics, a decor that's highly realistic, and it creates a walkthrough environment that literally, when I walk through it, I cry. It's really beautiful. And it creates a real deep interest to the guests. What happened during that period of time? What was that about? Who were these people? They were no different from us. How did it helps us learn about their pride of their culture and the sacrifices they gave to maintain a culture, both groups. So I left, so I've gone from, a resort to a museum type environment to a walkthrough attraction. And now this actually uses a set that relies on nature. It is an evening walk through at a place called Parc de la Gorge in a little town called Quetecook, Quebec. It's a town of 9,000 people. They wanted to bring more tourism into the town. They contacted the company Moment Factory, who came up with this walk-through evening attraction. So they took a place that was only being used during the day for hikers and turned it into an evening event. The first year they opened the event, they had 70,000 people come into the little town of Quetecook of 9,000. The town sold out of food. The second year they did it, they had 150,000 people come. And the town still sold out of food during the summer. It's a highly successful project, and it relied heavily in the story making. Is Marie Belzile, who was the director of the project, did research on Quebecois and Canadian and Native American myth and legend to create this story. So as you walk through the environment, you're experiencing a part of their culture which you may not know about, and it creates an interest for those that attend it and of all ages. Oh, these are stories we know. Here at the entrance, you have some introduction. The tour begins in the evening. These are, the character on the right is called a Gawaki, and it's from Native American legend. He is an ice monster, and he's a cannibal. And the woman on the right is Rose la Tulipe. It comes from an 18th century legend about a young woman that loved to dance and eventually started dancing, and one night met a man and danced and danced and danced. And at midnight he revealed himself as the devil and took her away. I like those stories. Here you can see part of the process. The process, we talked a lot about process. The processes are very much the same as you do in the theater or any other presentation, whether with the technology or with the scenery. We develop characters, we draw things on pieces of paper, we sketch, we test UV colors to create the effects we're looking at, we do other character work, and this is the result. So that's the Ford Lumina from the Moment Factory, which is an event that takes place in a park in a town that has 9,000 people and attracts 150,000 people every summer into that town. And what does it do? It tells the story of their culture, their home, their history, and of course it celebrates their landscape as well, because the walk is just a gorgeous walkthrough. So finally, I just want to touch bases on another storytelling. I want to come back. I was thinking, okay, we've done some projects in China. We're currently involved with the Legend Development Group on a new project here, a smaller walkthrough attraction, which when we were approached, it's with the Legend Development. It's at Shanghai Mountain, which is a mountain in the north of China, and the mountain is a volcanic mountain, and on the top of where the crater is, there's this big deep lake. The mountain is considered a mystical mountain in China and magical. It was closed to the public for 300 years because of the mystery of it. And it, when we approached it, we did research and studies into the lore of the area, and we discovered that there was an eternal battle between two dragons, the dragons that were fighting to maintain the water in the lake, and the fighting underneath the earth, the lava monster coming up. So we said, oh, this is a great myth. So we used that as the foundation for the story, and these are the early studies. We expect that this project, which is underway now, it's still in development, will be completed sometime next year. Through the courtesy of the Legend Development Group, I'm able to show that. There's your battle of the dragons. Here we're taking you underneath the earth and into the belly of the volcano. This is the first, the preliminary previs of the walkthrough. So you enter into the tunnel as an archaeological dig, and you go down an elevator and you discover this eternal battle between the dragons. And then these are early tests. This is the first test we did on the battle between the dragons. So the point being with this is you bring your children. You could talk about what are these legends? We're trying to stimulate cultural interest, these projects, and we hope this will do so. Quickly, as I wrap up the thing, the common threads, some of these are the story. All of these stories try to promote an understanding and an interest into a local region. All of these stories depend on authenticity. I heard another speaker speak of authenticity. It's a very important part of it. Because if you're not authentic, if you don't draw from the truth, chances are you'll see that it isn't the real thing. And also in terms of authenticity, when you're working in cultural environments, there's some things you can do and shouldn't do. And that comes to appropriateness. You could put up an image that would be an insult to, for instance, working with the Senecas, there are elements to that culture which we considered using as design elements. However, they're considered sacred. So you have to work with the local groups and the local cultures to develop with them, hand in hand, to create your program. All of these, it's all here. One thing I want to point out is these are not big projects. These are middle-sized projects to very small projects. What they do, though, is they serve as an economic driver. And I think that's really important, that the developers realize that art can drive economy, and that celebration of a local region can help drive not only more interest into that region, but can center the region. And there are groups doing it, and it should continue to happen. I'm seeing it happening here in China, even with smaller projects. I think we're beginning to recognize we're taking a break from globalism, and we're kind of looking inward to ourselves. We're coming on a homeward bound journey that brings us back to our home. So that's what I have about using your own home, your cultural assets, things that you want to celebrate your culture to develop successful and profitable attractions. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis.